So, picture this. It's November 1917, and in Russia, power isn't changing hands through an election, it's being taken by force. And right at the center of it all is one man, Vladimir Lenin, who had this incredible belief that an entire society could be engineered, like a machine. We're going to dive into this story of revolution, of absolute control, and the birth of the world's very first socialist state.
For Lenin, everything, and I mean everything, changed in one single year, 1887. This sentence right here, it really captures that exact moment when a loyal subject of the Russian Empire became its most determined enemy. This is the real starting point for the whole revolution.
So how does that even happen? How do you go from being Vladimir Ulyanov, just a young law student, to the revolutionary figure we all know as Lenin? Well, it wasn't some slow, gradual change. It was a sudden, violent break with his entire world.
Okay, this table here lays out the dominoes perfectly. The first one to fall, the execution of his older brother Alexander for plotting to kill the Tsar. That event was the catalyst. Then, in that very same year, Lenin himself gets expelled from university for protesting. Suddenly, a normal career is off the table. So what does he do? He dives head first into radical politics, which, no surprise, gets him arrested and eventually exiled. You can see how each step just pushed him further and further away from the system.
This right here is probably the most crucial thing to understand about him. You see, for a lot of socialists at the time, Karl Marx's writing was a lens, a way to analyze history. But for Lenin, it was a literal instruction manual. He took ideas like the dictatorship of the proletariat not as some far-off abstract concept, but as a direct order, a blueprint for tearing down the old state and engineering a new one from the ground.
So after his time in the harsh conditions of Siberia, and then living in exile all over Europe, Lenin really honed his strategy. He came to a powerful conclusion. A real revolution couldn't just be some spontaneous uprising of the masses. No, it had to be led by a disciplined, secret, and totally controlled organization. And his ideas created this massive split in the socialist movement, which this chart shows perfectly. On one side, you had the Mensheviks. They wanted a big, open democratic party. But Lenin's group, the Bolsheviks, they wanted the exact opposite, a small, elite group of professional revolutionaries. For Lenin, centralized control was way more important than democratic debate. He saw it as the only way to actually win.
Now, while Lenin's off in exile working on his theories, the world is about to change in a way that will make his blueprint a reality. World War I erupts, and for the Russian Empire, this is the beginning of the end. A massive power vacuum is about to open up.
Just think about the scale of this disaster. Over 2 million Russian soldiers were killed in the war. The economy was in ruins, and any trust the people had in the Tsar's government just evaporated. For almost everyone, this was a national tragedy. But for Lenin, watching from afar, it was the perfect opportunity.
And then, in February 1917, the whole thing just collapses. The Tsar steps down, and a shaky provisional government tries to take over. And this is where it gets wild. Germany, seeing a chance to knock Russia out of the war for good, makes a huge gamble. They put Lenin on a sealed train and send him right into the heart of the chaos.
So, Lenin arrives in Petrograd, and he doesn't waste a second. He's not there to cooperate or be patient. He immediately starts pushing for a second revolution, a more radical one, to get rid of the new government. He knew his moment had finally arrived.
And his platform, which became known as the April Theses, was just brutally simple and incredibly effective. He had 3 main demands: get Russia out of the war, give land to the peasants, and hand all power over to the workers' councils, the Soviets. While the new government was fumbling, Lenin's clear, powerful message started to win over a lot of people.
And then it happened, and it happened fast. On November 7th, Bolshevik forces moved to take control of all the key buildings and communication hubs in the capital. The provisional government just melted away with almost no resistance. Lenin's disciplined little party had just seized control of a vast state. The great experiment had officially begun.
But, taking power is one thing.
Actually, holding on to it is a whole different ballgame. Lenin now had enemies coming at him from all sides. The next phase was all about locking down Bolshevik rule, and the methods they used were going to be absolutely uncompromising.
The logic of this new government was stark, and it was absolute. Any kind of political opposition wasn't just seen as a disagreement anymore. It was completely redefined as a criminal act, as treason against the revolution itself.
So how do you enforce a rule like that? Well, you create an instrument to do it, and that instrument was the Cheka. This secret police force was set up with a deliberately vague mission and basically unlimited power to crush anyone they saw as a threat.
The year 1918 was just relentless. First, when elections for a new assembly didn't go the Bolsheviks' way, they just shut it down by force. Done. Then, they signed a peace treaty with Germany, giving up a huge chunk of territory just to get out of the war. And with the foreign war over, a new internal one began, the Russian Civil War.
To keep their Red Army supplied during this brutal civil war, Lenin rolled out an extreme economic policy. They called it war communism. Basically, the state took control of all industry and forcibly seized grain from peasants. The goal was simple: win the war, no matter the cost to the economy.
Well, the result was predictable, and it was devastating. After 3 years of this, the country was hit by a massive famine. Peasants were in open revolt all over the place, and the Russian economy had completely and utterly collapsed. War communism had helped them win the war, but it absolutely wrecked the country.
So staring into the abyss of a total collapse, Lenin does something really pragmatic. He pivots. He introduces the new economic policy, or NEP, which was basically a strategic retreat. It allowed for some limited small-scale capitalism to get the economy breathing again. It was a clear admission that war communism had been a disaster, but it was a move he had to make to save the state itself.
It's kind of ironic, though. Just as the state begins to stabilize, the health of its main architect begins to fail. Lenin wouldn't live long enough to see what his creation would turn into, but the blueprint he had designed was already locked in place. An assassination attempt back in 1918 had left him wounded, but then, starting in 1922, a series of strokes really began to take their toll, and they left him seriously incapacitated. From his sickbed, he could see the rising power of Joseph Stalin, and he actually tried to warn his comrades, but by then, it was too late. His authority was fading.
And on January 21, 1924, Vladimir Lenin died. He was only 53 years old. The man who had architected the entire revolution was gone, but the revolutionary state that he had built was now going to continue on without him.
So what was the legacy? What was the structure that he left behind? Well, it was a highly centralized state run by a single all-powerful party, a state that viewed violence as just another tool of policy. This political model would go on to shape and, in many ways, dominate the rest of the 20th century.
In the end, Lenin actually succeeded. He followed his blueprint and engineered a totally new kind of state. And that leaves us with a really big question, one that echoes through history. What are the consequences, both good and bad, when an entire society is built according to a single, rigid plan?